On this channel, we have covered a bunch of disturbing media. We've covered games, books, and things like that. However, one type of media we haven't covered is television, and more specifically, anime. Anime has become a lot more mainstream in the past 10 or so years, so a lot of anime before 2000 is pretty obscure and not a whole lot of people know about them. Besides Dragon Ball, of course. Now, I love a great anime story. My three favorite anime of all time are Devilman Crybaby, Neon Genesis Evangelion, and my favorite, of course, is Berserk, the 1997 version. But despite all three of those being pretty disturbing, they don't need a lot of explaining. They're pretty self-explanatory. You can understand exactly what happened on your own first watch, and it's not all that hard to really understand any of them. Well, in May of this year, I stumbled on an anime that I heard was pretty disturbing and avant-garde like Evangelion. So I decided to watch it. So I did watch it, and I was very confused at the end. To the point of where there were several times I legitimately thought I was having a stroke, because I heard what was being said on screen, I was watching it, and I physically could not understand what was happening. So, if you didn't read the title, the anime is Serial Experiments Lain. Like all other long-form content I have done, like House of Leaves and Fear and Hunger, I will be breaking up this video into 3 parts. The intro, which you are listening to right now, the summary, where I will discuss the entire series on an episode-by-episode basis, and finally, the explanation, where I will try to explain what happened and what it all means to the best of my ability. However, for this specific video, I have a small part after all of that. Because Serial Experiments Lain also did 3 very unique things. 1. Single-handedly made a band's career flourish like they'd never seen. 2. Seemingly told the future and had some parallels in its themes with the 9/11 terrorist attacks. But let's continue with the intro, shall we? Serial Experiments Lain is a series created by Yasuyuki Ueda and written by Chiaki J. Konaka in the summer of 1998, and is considered an avant-garde psychological techno horror, which is quite the genre description. However, if you've seen it, you know that it is pretty apt. There are moments that seemingly make no sense, as well as a bunch of clearly horror-like concepts, as well as some psychological stuff thrown in just for funsies. However, I do believe if you do not know what is going on, the show is nearly incomprehensible. At the very least, someone of my plebeian mindset found it that way on my first watch. While I go through the summary here, there's going to be times where you may find what I am saying to make no sense, which is normal. But try to stick with it and keep 4 questions in mind, because thinking of them will help with the analysis at the end. Those questions are: 1. Who or what is Lain? 2. Who or what is Eri? 3. What happens chronologically in the story? And 4. What is the message you're supposed to get out of Serial Experiments Lain? I also want to explain the title of the video real quick. No one understands Lain. The reason I chose that is because it's true. Not even I fully understand it. I believe that this work is truly not supposed to be fully understood, for reasons we will get into. Many people have many different interpretations of Serial Experiments Lain, so if I say something you don't agree with, don't think you're wrong or I'm wrong, because in truth, neither of us are. The show is confusing, and some things can be interpreted in different ways. Because you're not supposed to find a one-size-fits-all meaning to the story. You're supposed to find a reason for yourself. And in this video, I'm going to explain mine. But to do that, I need to explain the summary more precisely than any other video I've gone into before on my channel, because it matters a little more here. So let's get into the summary then, shall we? We open with a white screen. Japanese text reads, "Present day," and then "Present time," which, although this anime was made in the late 90s, it very much strangely holds up today. This very easily could have been in 2024. In fact, strangely enough, it makes a lot more sense that it would take place in 2024 as opposed to 1998. But we will get into that later. A voice rings out over this text that narrates,
"Present day. Present time."
which is a meme in the community because he says it kind of funny, I guess. The screen then turns to a bunch of static, and we can see Lain's reflection looking into the staticky screen with a blank face. Only when the static turns off Lain's reflection also strangely disappears. We then get an intro song, Duvet, by Boa, which, by the way, is one of the greatest anime openings of all time. I cannot show it here because the copyright gods will smite me down, but I highly suggest you watch it. This anime has gotten a little more popular recently, so the song has been heard a lot now. If you go onto TikTok, you will hear this song used pretty often, usually in some somber mood. This song has become so popular, in fact, that the band recently told a story how they gave this song to the anime all those years ago, and people are starting to recognize them, and they hear their songs so much, and they are super grateful to the anime. A lot of stuff on the band's official Instagram actually deals with Lain, because of how popular the song has made them. Now, of course, they had a following before Lain, but this absolutely boosted their popularity in some way, and they deserve it. It is one of the best anime intros I've ever seen, and it fits Serial Experiment's Lain vibe perfectly. After the intro, we get into Shibuya Crossing, with a bunch of people walking around and someone giving a monologue over it. This is how every single episode starts. The monologues are different, but the intro and then showing Shibuya Crossing and a bunch of people walking around is constant. This one is asking, "Why won't you come here?" And then you get the title card.
Layer 01.
We start with a psychedelic screen with words overlaid. Why? Why won't you come? I wish you would come here. It's not really specified who is saying this, or if it is thought by someone or anything else. It's just on screen. We see a bunch of people talking and have a great time in some alleyway. Some people are kissing and just doing normal nightlife stuff in Tokyo. We then cut to a girl on the roof of a building. She's wearing glasses and then takes them off and leans off the edge of the building. More text on screen reads that she says, "I don't need to stay in a place like this." She lets herself fall. She falls through the air with her clothes ripping and the signs crashing down all together at once until it meets its head on the same street we saw those people were kissing on. Nothing is left of her but a mess of blood and wires. The only thing she has left behind is a bag with her keychain on it. The screen fades away to the next day, where we get a shot of the bright morning sky and the hum of electrical wires can be heard. More text on screen reads, "If you stay in a place like this, you may not be able to connect." Finally, we see our main character, a short middle school girl with brown hair and a hair tie in the shape of an X on her hair, which is parted to the left, which is her signature look. She walks down the street with humming electrical wires in complete silence. She continues her commute on the train. She hears everyone and says what a racket all of it is, asking them to be quiet in a very assertive way, once again leaving the only sounds you hear, electrical wire. Lain walks to school and looks at her shadow, which is all wispy, like how you would see the shadow of light in water. She disassociates and words appear on screen again. "Everybody, hurry." She sits down at her desk with the only noise on screen a girl in the back of class crying very loudly. Some other girls try to console her and tell the crying girl not to think too much of what she's seen, because it's probably just a stupid prank. Lain looks back and wonders what this girl's crying about. Her classmate comes up to her and says that the reason she is crying is that the crying girl got an email from a girl named Yamoda Chisa, a girl who committed suicide a couple days ago. So it shouldn't be possible for her to send an email. Lain quietly says that she's not very good with computers, so she doesn't know if she got an email from the suicide girl either. Later in class, Lain tries to focus on what the teacher is writing on the chalkboard. Side note, does anyone else love the sound of chalk on a chalkboard? Just me? Okay. Funnily enough though, she seems to be in a coding class. You'll understand why that's funny later on, but as she's taking notes, all the letters on the chalkboard blend together. She starts to disassociate from reality again when she looks down at her hand and her fingertips open up and smoke comes out. Just then, it cuts to more text on the screen again, with the most chilling message ever that could be put on the screen at a time like this. "What's it like when you die? It really hurts." With the smiley face and all. Lain then tries to go home after all of that, which I feel like I'd be sort of alarmed if all of that happened to me, but I am not Lain. Anyway, she walks down her familiar street once again with nothing but the hum of electrical wires to accompany her. She gets home to her room and sits down. She grabs her computer, or as they are called in the show, her Navi, and logs on to see if she has a message from the dead girl. She struggles at first because, like she said, she's not good with computers, but she eventually figures it out. Now, you might notice the quite modern computer for 1998. It's got a personal assistant that asks for a password with her voice, and she gets in. She gets on her email and finds she has one new message from Yomoda Chisa. The email asks how Lain is doing, and then mentions things that only the real Chisa would know, like how her and Lain walked home together once. So that way, Lain should know that this is the real Chisa. She says she didn't die, but only gave up her body. She asks Lain if she understands yet, and if she doesn't, that's okay, because she will soon. Everyone will soon. Lain asks why Chisa died, and yet again, another chilling thing is said. God is here. Lain is rightfully alarmed, finally. She goes down the stairs to eat dinner with her family. Her mother and her sister are with her. Her sister leaves almost immediately, saying that she's not really hungry. Lain tries to tell her mom what's been going on, but her mom doesn't really seem to care. Lain waits in her room, in her bare onesie, until her father gets home late at night. Her father has a package with him and appears to be putting a graphics card into his huge gamer station. Her father notices her walking in his room and asks what's wrong. Lain asks her father if he can buy her a new computer. Her father laughs and turns on his computer. He then says that he has been telling her to upgrade her old computer for a long time, so he agrees. And no matter if it's the real world or the wired, people have to connect to live. That's how society works. The wired is the internet, by the way. Just thought I'd mention that. They call it the wired in this show. Her father says that even a quiet girl like Lain can make some friends in the wired. So there's nothing to be afraid of. Which is quite forward thinking about the internet in the late 90s, but like I said, this show predicted a lot. Lain says there's a friend she wants to see on the wired. Her father then laughs very strangely. The next day on the commute, the train crashes. There was an accident somewhere. People in the train wonder if someone was hit by it. Lain looks out the window and hallucinates that there's blood dripping from the roof of the train. Then all of a sudden, she is thrown into some surreal montage of people walking all over the place. Then empty places all over. Then wires and the hums of those wires. Then a railroad light and railroad tracks. We then see Chisa, the girl who killed herself, walk in front of the train. Lain tries to cry out, but no voice comes out. Chisa makes a horrible face, and then Lain is back in class, sweating, or maybe crying at her desk. Out of nowhere, Lain tries to concentrate on the board yet again. But this time, instead of the words on the board distorting into a jumbled mess, it forms a coherent sentence. Come to the wired as soon as you can. Lain walks home silently. Weirdly though, as if she's deep in thought. And then she sees Chisa again. Right next to her. Then as soon as she was there, she's gone. Thin air. The music fades out once again. Only to leave us with once again the hum of the wires. That's the first episode. Was it confusing? Did it make sense? Yes, it was confusing. No, it didn't make sense, but that's why I am here, to try to guide you through it. So let me tell you, no, this shouldn't really make sense. I would say it's kind of
weird.
I will explain everything after the summary is over though. So the plot here so far is Lain is a girl who is inexperienced with computers. An acquaintance of her commits suicide, but then emails her from the grave saying that she only lost her body, and now she's with God. Lain asks her dad to upgrade her computer to meet an old friend, all interspersed with weird imagery. Got it? Let's go into episode 2 now, which is titled We open in a club. Seemingly, the club is named Siberia. A man is sitting at a table alone. A scantily clad girl walks up to him in a gas mask. She offers him something in a napkin. The man gives her 10,000 yen, and then she gives it to him. This is seemingly a drug deal. Although just as we think that, text appears on the screen saying Accelera. It's not quite a drug, but it's gotten the same way. The man opens up the napkin and takes out a pocket knife to open it up, and finds the quote-unquote drug, a little robot. He puts it in his mouth, and time seemingly slows down around him. The text on screen, which is his thoughts, I assume, says that he feels accelerated. He freaks out and then sees a guy get pushed to the ground violently. Everyone looks over, and it seems that Lain, or someone that looks just like her, pushed him down and yelled at him. The man who took the drug seemingly is transfixed on the girl that looks like Lain. The screen cuts to the next morning where Lain is walking to school with the too familiar hum of the electrical wires. She stops and notices a man in black with piercing blue eyes watching her from behind a telephone pole. Not very stealthy, dude. She can clearly see you. Lain, finally doing something smart, runs away from him to find her friend group in the morning. They talk about how they were at this club last night and they saw a girl who looked just like Lain, but she acted the exact opposite. Loud and pushy. They argue amongst themselves if it was really Lain or not. The leader of the group says that Lain should go with them next time to Siberia just to see if it was her. Girls like Lain tend to have their personality do a complete 180 when they go to clubs like that. So just to see if it was her, they invite Lain to go to the club with them. Lain then gets out of class and sees someone standing in the closet, watching her. Lain, for once, has an appropriate reaction and sort of freaks out when she notices that this being has the same face that Shisa did when she got hit by the train in her vision. All of a sudden, shadow people come out from the walls and walk past Lain. I'm pretty sure I've seen this exact same thing when I took too much Benadryl once. Either way though, they all leave Lain alone to cry to herself after seeing that clearly frightening vision. Lain walks home to find a delivery man with her new Navi. He says it's weird because this computer is like super amazing, like top of the line. Using it, Lain can freely navigate the wired, no problems associated with it. Lain is confused why she got such a good one. She signs for the package and waits for her dad to come home to set it up. He gets home and Lain comes down the stairs to greet him. Her dad says that he'll set up the computer after dinner. Lain, in a strange twist, insists that he sets it up now. Her father, strangely not too off-put by this, agrees and sets it up for her. He says that this computer will mature and grow as Lain's relationships mature and grow. Lain then gets a text saying to come to Siberia. All the girls are waiting for her. Lain begrudgingly goes, and as she's walking down the stairs, a group of young kids bump into her. She gets into the club, and all of her friends are sort of teasing her for wearing such covering clothes when they are in a club. They all agree that maybe it wasn't Lain last night. Lain is clearly nothing like the girl that was seen, only for it all to be interrupted by a shooting.
So...
Someone in the club has shot in a gun twice. 2 people are dead on the ground. People scatter like roaches and everybody is freaking out. Lain freezes, however. Alice, Lain's best friend, realizes that Lain has frozen, like a deer in the headlights. She runs over to Lain to try to get her to run away, but just then we see the person who was shooting was the guy from the beginning of the episode. This guy sees Lain clearly and freaks out. He screams at Lain, asking why she's making him do this to people. He just wanted to take Accelera in peace to clear his head. So why is Lain making him do this? Lain is rightfully confused. He then says something strange. He then says, "You're that scattered god," and then he stops. He says Lain is a scattered god. Whatever that means. But this guy is just a junkie, right? Lain then does something completely out of character and walks towards him. The man then points the gun at Lain. Lain, seemingly out of character, shows no fear and walks closer towards him. He says that the wired can't interfere with the real world. The guy cries as Lain gets closer, saying he wants nothing to do with her or her plan. Lain then does something unexpected again. Instead of her quiet voice, A loud, booming, commanding voice comes out saying,
どこにいたって人はつながっているのよ
No matter where you go, people are connected. So, resisting is futile, I guess. He shakenly takes the gun, points it at his own mouth, and then... blood splatters on Lain's face. All audio is cut out, and Lain is left alone with the rest of the... The next episode starts literally right where the last one left off, with the police cars at Siberia. Obviously, they are there with the shooting and the suicide happening. The police grab Lain, as she was sort of involved in this, after she talked to the shooter. On the way out of the club, as the police are escorting Lain out, you hear people whisper about someone named the Lain of the Wired.
Push out. Layer 03.
The police are interrogating Lain. They say that they tried to call her parents, but no one answered, which is weird because she is registered as a person and her address is there. So it's weird that no one is answering. They question her a little, but seeing as she seems like a timid little girl, they let her go with Alice back home. The police drive both Alice and Lain home. When Lain gets home, sure enough, no one is there. Strange. With nothing else to do, Lain gets on the computer. She just like me, for real. It's very strange and not really explained, but she hears people while she's on her computer. She falls asleep, and when she wakes up, everyone is there again. She goes down and thinks about asking her parents about where everyone was last night, but decides not to. She walks to school on that familiar street once again with the familiar hum of the wires. But now, she senses someone watching her. She sees a black car and a red light turns on in it, almost as if from a camcorder that's recording. The light follows her and she runs away from it. After school, Lain gets a letter in her locker. Her friends all fawn over it, thinking it's a love letter, but when she opens it, it's just a computer chip looking thing. Her friends have no idea what it is, and neither does Lain. So she goes home and asks her father, the only person she knows that knows tons of stuff about computers. Here she hears on the computer about something called a psyche chip. A chip built in Taiwan, but designed by some people called the Knights. In the Wired, lots of rumors like that exist. Weird, almost like it's a creepypasta or an ARG or something. She also seems to hear people's thoughts or emails or something over the Wired. This could just be a metaphor of her looking all over the Wired, but it's not explained. Finally, her father gets home and she shows him this weird chip. Her father seems very uneasy and pretends to not know what the thing she has is, and quickly leaves her room. Lain, rightfully suspicious, goes to the only place at night that she knows lots of people to ask. Siberia. Club. She gets there and some grown dude with a Newport in his mouth asks Lain when they're gonna rave again. Then he says that she looks like a little girl now though. It seems like this guy mistook Lain for the one that is super bossy from the last episode. She finds those kids that she passed on the staircase in the last episode, and seeing as they are a similar age to her, she asks them. These three kids are amazed at what Lain has. It's a psyche chip. They say that it's a chip that can almost blur the lines between the real world and the Wired. It's that powerful. It could go into a calculator and make it to connect to the internet. It's that powerful. One of the kids says that he wants to go on a date with Lain for the information that he just gave her. But not this Lain, the bossy one. He says that a lot of people take on a different personality when they are browsing the Wired. And that's where he met the other Lain. It's pretty weird how that's true nowadays. Most people do take on a completely different personality while on the internet. That's pretty true. Anyway, it cuts to Lain's sister coming home to find those men in black at the door with those weird glasses that I'm pretty sure double as camcorders, but I don't know for sure what they are. They say that they were never here, and then they leave. Her sister finds this strange, which it is, but she immediately forgets about it when she goes upstairs to see Lain almost naked working on her computer. And she says the reason she's almost naked is because static electricity can fry a motherboard, and if she doesn't wear much, static electricity isn't a problem. Which is true, by the way. You can ruin a motherboard that way. Weirdly, right after this, Lain's personality flips like a switch. Her personality switches to the assertive one. She enthusiastically greets her sister with a smile and a strong voice. This personality, or this version of Lain, I will now be calling the Lain of the Wired. The fourth episode is titled
Layer 04.
This is when the show kinda gets hard to follow. So stick with me, and at the end of it all, I will explain everything coherently to the best of my ability. The episode opens up with Lain modifying her computer even more, and like the end of the last episode, her personality is completely different. It's no longer that of the timid young Lain, but almost like the Lain of The Wired. Very outgoing and more like a stereotypical teenager. Her father watches her from the door and he turns away in uneasiness. He goes down to the living room to read the newspaper, and Lain's sister comes in and says that Lain is acting differently. Her father disagrees, but when she leaves, he says that he actually does think that something is different with Lain. Almost like her personality is getting upgraded, or overwritten. Lain then goes to school and people are talking about another rumor. They say tons of people are committing suicide and people don't know why. Lain strangely butts into the conversation and says that she knows about this rumor too. She seems almost happy to talk about it. Her friends say that she has changed recently, to echo what her father has said. Later, her and her friends are hanging out, and Lain says a rumor about the suicides are linked to some RPG game on The Wired. All the victims were said to be obsessed with this game. Lain says she needs to go home now though. She wants to work on her computer, so she leaves. We then see the Siberia Club for some reason. The Newport man from earlier is the DJ here at the booth. We hear Lain but do not see her. She asks Newport man, who is named JJ, and asks him what game that all those suicide victims were obsessed with. JJ says the game is called Phantoma. JJ then turns around to see nothing. The only thing there is the DJ booth, an electrical device. Remember that. Lain then looks around in this game. She sees a guy who is playing this game through The Wired. She sees this guy playing this game and freaking out. He shoots wildly and somehow he shoots in the real world as well, while playing this VR-like RPG. While he does this, he sees this little girl, but it is an enemy in the game he's playing. Mistaking this little girl for an enemy in the VR RPG, he shoots. He confused the real world for an enemy in the game, killing this very real little girl. Lain watches a little longer and seems sad to see the girl die. Her father comes in as she is watching this from her computer, and Lain's dad says, "Do not confuse The Wired for the real world. They are separate." Lain then disagrees. She says that The Wired and the real world are actually not so different, and soon she'll be able to move physically through The Wired. Her father says that's obviously impossible. Remember that The Wired is like the internet. That would be impossible. But is it? VR chat is a real game, and it blurs the line between reality and VR, kinda, doesn't it? Back when this was made in '98, something like this was unheard of, but in a way, we are living this. We kinda can physically move through the internet. VR chat is a little different than what Lain is saying, but it's a similar line of thought. So, Lain continues to browse. She learns more about the Knights, and that they are already sort of blurring the line between The Wired and the real world. This is sort of an experiment, merging this VR game with a children's tag game and the real world all at once. And clearly it's worked. I mean, a kid who was playing the RPG killed a real little girl. This was the Knights doing. The episode ends with Lain in her room, with her computer almost sort of growing. Wires are streamed about, the computer is bigger with more hardware. Suddenly in this room though, a red light appears. Like those Men in Black's camcorder masks. Lain looks out the window to see those two men in black outside her window. Looking, Lain softly says to stop. And then loudly, she yells to stop. Then their camcorder masks, as if responding to Lain's command, explode. It's almost as if Lain can speak through and, in a way, to technology. Or things that are connected through The Wired. Which nowadays, we do have almost everything connected to the internet. I mean, my fucking fridge is connected to the internet right now. Like, why? It seems that Lain, for some reason, has the power to speak through and to technology itself. She then thinks about the night, and the they have garnered. Episode 5 starts off with a monologue, and it's a pretty important one to the meaning of Lain as a whole in the series, so I will read it in full. Mankind is a creature that no longer evolves, is it not? Compared to other animals, the cancer rate in man is exceedingly small. One theory says that it's a neoteny, and is no longer able to evolve. If this is true, then what an absurd creature man has evolved into. Not knowing what it is that drives them, they keep their bodies merely to satisfy their desires of the flesh. They're worthless, don't you think? That's all mankind is. But it's no longer necessary to remain a wretched human being. Mankind has finally created an exit whereby he may escape. The network. The wired lane.
あなたは誰？
僕は神様だよ。
Distortion. Layer 05.
What does any of that mean, though? If you're like me, you wondered what the word neoteny means. What it means is the retention of the traits of the juvenile when one is an adult. If we plug that into the speech of the so-called God that he just gave, what it is saying is that humans are a species that is already done with evolution. We are as perfect as we can be already. There's nothing else we can evolve into. Not physically, anyway. So if we aren't perfect but can no longer evolve, how do we achieve further perfection? Simple. We discard our physical bodies and merge with our world with the one of the wired, or the internet, where things live forever. True perfection does imply immortality, at least in this God's speech. This episode is where things nearly start to become incomprehensible if you don't know what's going on already. At least to me it did. Like I said earlier, the first time I saw this episode, I thought I was having a stroke. Because I saw what was going on screen, and I heard the characters and what they were saying, but none of it stuck. It made no sense. I could not understand what was happening. But I am your guide here, and I will do my best to explain things as they happen. During this episode, two stories are playing out at the same time. The first is Lain experiencing visions or dreams or something, and the second is what is happening to Lain's sister. Let's talk about Lain's sister first, because despite how I thought when I originally watched this episode, it's easier to understand that half of the episode. She is firstly given a napkin or something while on her way to walking to school in Shibuya. A Rizzler of a little kid here tries to hit on her and spills a soda on her. So she takes a napkin out and tries to wipe it off, but ends up seeing on the napkin that the words, "The other side is already full," is on it. She is naturally confused. She goes home and she's seen eating dinner, when, for lack of a better term, she goes fully crazy. This is one of 3 moments in Serial Experiments Lain that really stuck with me, because it is so weird and so confusing. She flashes between a bunch of weird visions where she's lying down in Shibuya Crossing, then at a restaurant, when she spills a coffee and the puddle spells out, "Fulfill the prophecy." And then she goes to the bathroom because she is confused and wants to splash water on her face, because why the hell is she flashing between things and can't remember what happens between them? And when she's splashing the water on her face, the wall reads, "Fulfill the prophecy," written over and over in blood. She runs home panicking because any human would do the same, and when she gets there, she comes face to face with herself? The one that was eating dinner a few minutes ago? They stare at each other, and then the sister that was freaking out just disappears. Lain walks by and asks what's wrong, to get no response. But then she sees this data ghost thing of the sister that was freaking out. So what does any of that mean? Well, I'm just going to jump ahead of here a little so it's not as confusing, so stay with me. Because of her sister's close proximity to Lain, she is already sort of merged with the wired in a way, and her mind just physically could not handle it. She psychologically breaks. So what does that mean for the sister overall? Well, the creator of the show, Ueda, had to say this in a panel about it in a show in Maryland in 2000. Mika became a victim of the wired. Lain started delving into the wired, so did Mika, and Mika got stuck in this netherworld in between. So while she still exists in the physical world, anything she does is sort of like a fax. It just comes out. But it's not actually her because herself is still sort of stuck in the wired. So her existence is sort of in a puppet-like state. So Pugzer, explain that in even more simpler terms. Okay, so if you've ever seen Jujutsu Kaisen, you know when Gojo uses his domain, when you are exposed to it, you sort of just freeze and mentally kind of break because it's infinite? It's sort of like that. The internet is infinite and has infinite information. If someone physically were to get hit by all of that all at the same time, it would simply just destroy their brain. Hence this confusing scene we just described. So what happens to Lain in her dreams in the other half of the episode? Well, she's visited by 4 ghosts, for lack of a better term. Now, here's where it gets confusing. The four ghosts are four of the pieces of the self or the ego by the famous psychologist and psychotherapist Carl Jung. Those being the self, or in this case, the doll, the mask, the great mother, and the great father. So basically, Lain is talking to parts of herself through the dreams. That's what dreams are, after all, your mind trying to make sense of your reality. The doll is the part of the personality that, simply put, is a small piece of the true self, the original. The doll talks to Lain and basically tells her that there is nothing in the world that Lain does not already know that has not happened yet. She knows everything. My fellow Persona fans know the next part of the personality, and that is the mask. In other words, the self we show to others, one that fits into society. This mask tells Lain that prophecies are real. Sure, no one can know what will happen for sure, but things are made to happen. Or as the mask says, the events in history are made to connect, and Lain is here to fill a role in that society. The mother is up next. In Jungian philosophy, the mother is the part of the personality that represents safety and understanding, nurturing and protection. Lain's mother tells her that reality isn't necessarily real. It's information put together by the synapses of the brain. So in a way, the wired, or the internet, could also be considered a physical world. We would just need the right brain to put together the information. Is that confusing? Yes. Good. Finally, the father is next. The father in Jungian philosophy is the decision maker, the powerful one, and the one that makes the decisions overall. Lain's father tells her that although there may not be a god in the real world, a god of the wired could impact the real world itself. Not physically, but through information. If he can influence people's thoughts and decision-making ability, he could cause things to happen by just giving a prophecy, a self-fulfilling prophecy. By telling someone a piece of information, he can impact the real world, therefore merging reality and the wired. Think of it this way. If you go on the internet and you see an article recommended to you that says, "This party of people are evil and dangerous," then you read it and believe it. The next time you go outside and you see someone of that party of people, you're going to be cautious. So what if the god of the internet could show you specifically things that you want to see? He could subtly influence you and make you do the things that he wants you to do. Sound familiar? It's a pretty modern concept. Once again, this show was made in the late 90s. This was predicted almost 30 years ago. Other than the dreams, however, Lain goes to school in this episode and her friends are asking her how she is hacking things. Her face appeared on the big screen in Shibuya. Lain says she has no idea. She hasn't been hacking anything. After Lain sees that data-like ghost of a sister, she goes upstairs and goes onto the computer, where her room is even more filled with wires. But why does Lain dream about all those things? In Jungian philosophy, dreams are a sort of
distortion
of reality. Lain knows all of these things already. Her subconscious can't tell her any other way though, hence the dreams. Episode 6 is up and it heavily involves the Knights, the group we mentioned a while back, but the name of the episode is
Kids Layer 06.
Lain is in a room, which is now filled with wires and a thin layer of water on the ground. Why? I genuinely don't know why the water is there. Maybe it's water cooling the stuff everywhere? Anyway, Lain is in the Wired, talking to tons of people having a blast, completely infatuated with the Wired, like a lot of people are nowadays with the internet, myself included. She spends all night on the Wired. And being on the internet every day absolutely influences us and what we do in a day. Think about it. We wouldn't know nearly the same amount of information about world events if not for the internet. We would have to wait for a paper or the TV or something, but now we can just go online and look up stuff about the real world anytime we want. Why leave the internet when we have limitless information right in front of us? Lain is clearly in a similar position. The next morning she goes to school. On the way there, she sees a bunch of kids looking like they're trying to give Goku energy for a spirit bomb or something. They are raising their hands up to the sky and looking up. Lain looks up too, but sees nothing. She gets to school and her friends invite her out to do some stuff, and Lain goes along with them, wearing makeup and trendy clothes. As she's out, she sees more kids doing the same exact thing, raising their hands and looking up at the sky. This time, she looks up and she sees it. This is the second of 3 things that really stuck with me in Serial Experiments Lain. The clouds open up and reveal a godly-looking Lain. Lain is literally in the sky, pulling back the clouds. Hey, so what the fuck does this mean? Well, remember how the Wired and the real world are sort of merging? So anything is really possible, I guess. But who's doing this? The Knights? The god of the Wired? Well, Lain has to find out. So she rushes home. She gets on the Wired only to be guided to the information about Dr. Hodgson, a scientist who believed that kids have the true power of everything, as they are the next generation after all. So if kids are influenced, everything will be. Lain learns from this doctor that he did some psychological experiment about PSI, which he describes as a small psychic energy only available in children, or at the very least, the most available in children. Now, according to the creator of the show himself, this literally does not matter. It's pseudo-silence. It has nothing to do with the message of the story other than kids can be influenced easier and therefore change more things through them. This scientist created a machine that can influence people, specifically children. And the Knights recreated this machine to influence children on a grander scale. In this case, making a giant Lain in the sky. Remember, the Wired and the real world are getting closer and closer together, so they can just kind of do this through the Wired. Just like how we could go into Photoshop and Photoshop a dragon in the sky and just put it on Twitter. The Knights sort of did that here with the giant Lain in the sky, but in the real world. The episode ends with the Men in Black once again using their red light camcorders to look into Lain's room. Lain gets angry and goes downstairs and outside to confront them, accusing them of being the Knights. They tell her to get down really fast, and just as they tell her that, her room explodes. Lain wonders why they saved her, and they say that they are not the Knights, but the Knights did just try to kill her and blow up her room and her computer. The episode ends with the Men in Black driving off.
Society. Layer 07.
Episode 7 starts with Lain at her computer as usual, when her sister walks up and just looks in, muttering weird things to herself. It then cuts to a weird guy walking around town. He's in VR goggles and wires sticking out all over. VR Man here is walking all over town and looking to find the Knights the whole time throughout the Wired and the real world at the same time, so he can be recruited to them. Then we cut to 3 people who are the real Knights: a businessman, a housewife, and a guy who sits in his dirty room all day. However, the difference between these 3 and the VR guy is that these 3 hide their secret identities of being Knights very well in their day-to-day life. And the VR guy is loudly proclaiming that he is looking for the Knights on the Wired and on the street. He is being really obvious about it, and people are starting to look at him funny. We then see Lain and Alice on the roof. Lain is talking to herself on the roof, saying that the real world isn't so real. Which is a whole mess of a statement, but we'll get into that at a later episode. Alice tells Lain that she's worried about her. She's almost regressing back to her extremely introverted self. Alice and the group of girls aren't just taking Lain out on the town just because. They like Lain as a person. Lain almost cries at this fact. One of the first times we see Lain show genuine emotion when she's not the Lain of the Wired personality. Alice walks off and Lain ponders what she was just told. Interspersed with all of these next scenes we're about to discuss, the VR guy is going around and still trying to find the Knights. But on Lain's end, she goes home to find the Men in Black. She's hesitant around them, even though she knows they aren't Knights and that they are trying to help her. One of the Men in Black takes off his weird recorder goggles and asks Lain to go with them if she wants to learn more about them. But he says that they will not force her if she doesn't want to go. Lain reluctantly agrees. They drive to a building where the Men in Black show Lain their boss, an older man who is putting together an old computer and can't figure out why it isn't working. Lain, being the computer genius that she is, fixes it almost immediately. This was a test from the Men in Black's boss to see if this is really Lain. The boss then asks Lain some hard questions that clear up a little bit of the mystery around Lain. He firstly asks if Lain, the Lain of the Wired, and any other Lains are the same person. The second thing the man asks Lain is if her family is her real family. Lain says of course they are. The man then asks when her father's birthday is. What about her mother's? What about her sister's? Where did her parents meet? A girl in junior high school should at the very least know her parents' birthday. What about Lain's own birthday? Lain can't remember even that. Something that should now be abundantly clear is that Lain is not a normal person. Obviously, I won't get into it that much, but at the very least, her family is not her real family. Lain then falls to the ground, and then she realizes something. What it is probably something about who or what she truly is. Either way though, she gets up and is now in her Lain of the Wired personality. Or maybe it's better to say that the two personalities finally become one, as Lain realizes more about herself. Lain then gets angered by all the questions and leaves. Carl, the blue-eyed member of the Men in Black, tries to stop her, only for his boss to snap at him and tell him to let her go, leaving Lain to go back home. The final part of the episode shows VR Man dead in a ditch. It would seem that the Knights didn't want him to join as he was too loud and not secretive enough. Even worse, he made some people realize that the Knights exist. He could not fit into their
society.
The next episode is very, very confusing, and it goes more into psychology, so it's going to be a trip, so just try to stay with me. This next episode is pretty much about rumors, so it makes sense that it's called
Rumors. Layer 08.
Lain starts the episode endlessly scrolling through the Wired. Doom scrolling, some might even say, where she eventually comes across a porn site, which has the words "come on in" on the front page, which my little brain found very funny. Here she hears a rumor about a company about to switch from IPv6 to IPv7, so they can control the Wired better. This company is called Tachibana Industries, which is a play on Apple. Tachibana is a fruit in Japanese, and they're a tech company, and the joke is, so is Apple. But the important thing here is that this is just a rumor Lain found, on a porn site at that. She then scrolls around more and finds all sorts of rumors on the Wired. The next day at school, Alice comes up to Lain and asks her if she did that in the Wired. Lain asks what she means by that. Alice sees that Lain looks confused and drops the subject, only to look at a teacher driving a nice car into the parking lot, and she fawns over him. Lain then goes to class and looks at her smartphone, which, by the way, this show was made in '98. Prediction. Anyway, she scrolls through her smartphone when she finds more rumors all over the Wired. She will then explain how none of it matters and it's boring. But just as she does that, a voice rings out. It claims that Lain does find all these rumors interesting. She wants to learn more. This voice then exclaims that it is God. And to add even more to that, God will say that Lain is just like him. Perhaps not all-powerful, but all-knowing. She wants to hear the rumors and the juicy gossip. And if you think about it, Lain has now had two personalities become one. However, she is still not acknowledging a third personality. One that craves gossip and juiciness. One we haven't seen physically, and for good reason. The third and final Lain. One I will call Smug Lain. Lain comes into her classroom where everyone is staring at her. Everyone. The teachers, the students, everybody. Lain will then break down and cry. Later we see a fantasy in Alice's head. Her and her teacher are about to have sex. Only when she notices Lain in her bed is when she stops touching herself and looks at Lain, who is sitting there smug and laughing at her. Alice yells at Smug Lain, and Smug Lain just laughs and laughs at her. So it was Lain spreading rumors all over the Wired and watching everyone, Alice thinks. We then see our Lain talking to the Smug Lain, saying that she hates that version of her. It's every part of herself that she hates personified. Lain then tries to strangle her other smug self. Now is a good time to talk about Lain's personalities again. Here's where the psychology comes in again. It goes like this. Sigmund Freud, the famous psychoanalyst, split the personality into three different parts: the ego, the superego, and the id. If we put Lain's three personalities into these three archetypes, it makes a lot more sense than you'd think. The original Lain, a childlike one with a good sense of right and wrong, would probably be the superego, the idealistic, childlike part of the mind that tries to show us right from wrong. She was childlike, like the original Lain. It tries to show us right from wrong, when in reality, the world isn't black and white like that. The ego would probably be Lain of the Wired, the one that is strong and keeps the id in check. It's sort of the strongest and most present parts of the three unconscious parts of the mind, but I'm not a psychoanalyst, so if any of this is wrong, I apologize. I'm going off base knowledge. Then finally, the id, the smug Lain. The things that make us feel good that we don't like to admit. The part of us that we don't like. Sounds like something Lain just said, right? It's dark and inaccessible, as Freud said, which is the third smug Lain, and it fits pretty perfectly into the id category. We don't even see smug Lain until the show is more than half over. I digress. But God says that Lain is also God. Everyone has a Lain, and Lain has everybody. Lain says that she wishes everyone could just forget what Lain did, spreading the rumors and watching everything and doing all the things she hates. God then asks, why doesn't she do that? She is also God. Lain agrees and does just that. Deletes all the memories of everyone who ever saw her. So she does. Only go to school where no one even acknowledges her. She deleted everyone's information of Lain doing that. And if that information gone, our present Lain here is also gone. Lain then wakes up. She's in front of her computer, alone yet again. Only thing she can do is go online and look at more
rumors.
The 9th episode of Lain is quite weird, which you may think is par for the course, and of course that is true, but this episode explains two ideas. The identity and the nature of the antagonist of the series, and 2, it expands on the idea of the last episode that if no one remembers information, did it even really happen? Or does it even matter that it happened? A sort of if a tree falls in the woods, and if no one's around to hear it, did it really happen kind of thing.
Protocol Layer 09.
This episode starts with a person saying, if you want to be free of suffering, you should just believe in God. Whether or not you believe in him, God is always by your side. Which normally wouldn't be weird of a statement to hear from some Christian TV program, but clearly Lain is not that. As they've already alluded to God not being unique, or at the very least, have a counterpart in The Wired. I think that this statement is trying to mislead you. We've already sort of established that God is not really all that kind to Lain. So just blindly following what he says and what he believes is sort of going against the whole message here. After this statement, we get some weird footage about Roswell, New Mexico. You know exactly what I'm talking about, the alien conspiracy. The show then states that although it is unproven, pretty much every single person that knows about it associates it with aliens, showing how information can spread even if it's not true. To quote the show, conjecture has become fact, and rumor has become history. We then see Lain sulking in a room, when a literal alien comes into a room and smiles at her. Because, yeah, We then get another weird footage part of the episode, about another conspiracy theory. This one being the MJ-12 document, which is a whole thing I don't want to get into, but just know it's a conspiracy theory that's been proven false, but people still talk about it. After that footage, we see Lain's family talking about how it's all gonna be over soon. Remember that these people are really not her family. They are real people, but they are planted to make Lain think she has a family. We also see her sister still having a broken mind. Lain then goes to Siberia, where she finds that boy who helped her with the psyche chip in episode 3. She takes him up on the offer of the date that he offered. She takes him to her room and implies that this little boy is a member of the Knights, and that they are trying to get her to install a chip which will alter her personality and sing to the Knights tune instead. He then kisses Lain on promptly. Uncool, little bro, uncool. Later, we then get some more strange real footage parts of the episode. But this time it talks about Vannevar Bush, I don't know if I said that name right, the man who created the Memex system, a sort of precursor to the computer. After that, a real footage segment about a guy named John C. Lilly, who created sensory deprivation tanks in accordance with his theory that we are lower life forms to some sort of cosmic being. Then, by taking psychoactive drugs, we can communicate with them in sensory deprivation tanks. After that, Ted Nelson, who thought of the satellite that we could put into Earth's orbit and create a library that anyone could access from any computer, the precursor to the internet. Then finally, a footage segment about a man named Douglas Rushkoff, a man that proposed the ELF bands, a series of electromagnetic waves between Earth's atmosphere and the ionosphere, something he called Earth's brainwaves. His theory says that once Earth reaches a certain amount of people, the precise amount of people as there are neurons in the human brain, somehow we could create a way to link all of humans as if they were neurons and synapses, awakening Earth as a single conscious being. This entire segment is extremely hard to follow, and I had trouble even talking about it. So don't feel bad if you didn't understand it. I'll explain it all at the summary. However, all of these segments are about real people and real things that happened. However, they are all either conspiracy theories or real facts. However, the episode doesn't specify which is which, making the water muddy if any of it is real, or if all of it is real, showing us how easy it is for the media, and by extension the internet, is to manipulate people and things based on things that just aren't true, and then make those things true by making the rumor believed. Hence the thing we said earlier, conjecture has become fact, and rumor has become history. However, there is one more of these footage segments, one that actually pertains to the story of Lain, although it doesn't tell you that. Masami Eri, chief researcher at Tachibana General Labs, further developed the hypothesis of the worldwide neural network. His hypothesis proposed a wireless network whereby all humanity would be plugged in at an unconscious level without the need for any device. Furthermore, he encoded the Schumann resonance factor and inserted it into the 7th gen wired protocol on his own initiative. Upon discovering this, Tachibana General Labs dismissed Eri. 1 week later, Masami Eri's body was found on the Yamanote train line. After this is said, we see Lain standing on the street, finally face to face with the antagonist of the series, God. Or what we should say is Eri Masami, the so-called God of the Wired. We are getting close to being done now, and I know this is all super confusing, but remember, after the summary I will do my best to explain some of the questions that I originally proposed, so stick around.
Love. Layer 10.
This episode is weird, but it starts to show you the truth finally after all of this time, but just a little bit. The episode starts with Lain and God, who we know is Eri, on the streets talking to each other. Eri says some things that clear up some of the questions right away. The Knights are worshippers of Eri, or the God of the Wired. Lain is a creation of Eri. She's not a real human, or at least not a normal one. Eri constructed this fake life for Lain. Her family was fake, and even her friends were fake. However, after these things are revealed, you may notice something strange about the first scene of them talking. Their bodies are switched. The things Lain would ask, Eri asks. And then the things Eri responds with are the things that Lain should respond with. You can look at this in several ways, but it's pretty abstract. One is that Eri already knows what Lain is going to say, so he pulls a Joseph Joestar and just predicts the whole conversation. Or, Lain and Eri are physically the same person at this point. It's possible Eri created Lain, a piece of software, and then did the exact same thing to her as he did to himself, making almost a copy. Lain doesn't believe Eri after all this, so she returns to her normal life. She goes to school and finds out that without Eri, no one even notices her. Like she's a ghost. Not even a single person can see her. She runs home and realizes her fake family has all left her as well. However, her fake father comes back for one conversation. He says that he's not even supposed to be there. However, in some way, he did love Lain. Perhaps not as her actual father, but as something that loves what she is anyway. He then leaves. Lain then returns to the Wired. Through the Wired, she uses her influence to find exactly who the Knights are now. Lain is very pissed at Eri and wants revenge. She hates Eri and she hates all that he did. So she wants to eliminate all the Knights so Eri can no longer play God. As he said before, what is a god without worshippers? So Lain struggles a bit, but through the use of the people in the Wired, she finds all of the Knights' identities. She posts the lists of Knights somewhere on the Wired, and Tachibana Industries, which by the way is the Man in Black, proceed to then hunt them all down and kill them. Their plan of merging the worlds cannot come to fruition. Lain then strangely returns to the beginning of the episode, the same street where she talked to Eri originally. She thinks that she has beaten this false god, but he returns as smug as ever. He says that as long as one person still acknowledges him as God, he will continue to be just that. God. If you haven't caught on, the one person who still verifies his existence is Lain herself. Eri then informs the viewer finally what Lain is, a rumor that was originally started in The Wired, of a god within it. Eri then gave her a real body and transfixed this rumor to it, making it real. As we said earlier, conjecture becomes fact, and rumor becomes history. Lain was a fake god, made into a real one by Eri, and now she knows that she is not real, and she feels like no one in reality could ever her.
どっちでもいいよそんなの。
Pornography. Layer 11.
Layer 11 in pornography. So this episode is pretty weird, like a lot of the show. It's pretty avant-garde, but in a weirdly out-of-character way this time. The literal first 10 minutes of the episode is a guitar riff played over a recap, which is an interesting choice. However, it has a purpose, sort of. During this recap, there are two things seen here that are not seen anywhere else in the show. One is a message that says, Alice loves, needs you. The other is the logo for Tachibana Labs. After this recap is over, Eri appears in Lain's room, who is fully connected with wires and weird machines all over her body now. Eri says doing what she is doing is dangerous. Reliving the memories all at once like that could break her. Lain, who is disgusted at him, says that she's not a machine, so stop talking about her like one. Eri then retorts that she's right. She's not hardware, but software. A program given life, reinforcing that Lain is in some way a piece of software, sort of. After this, Lain has an internal monologue, with a proverbial angel and devil on her shoulder. The angel being Chisa, the girl who committed suicide in the first episode, and the devil being the guy who committed suicide in Siberia in the second episode. They are both arguing back and forth whether Lain should just kill herself and return to being just the Lain of the Wired, a rumor. This goes back and forth for a while until we cut to Alice. Alice is in her room when Lain, who now has the body of that alien, enters. The symbolism here is that Lain is the rumor that became fact, like the Roswell alien. However, there's a shot here that is animated very weirdly and it looks right out of a YouTube poop, and I find that very funny. Anyway, Lain goes to Alice and says that she didn't do it. She didn't spread her secret about her and the teacher. Alice then, in some way, realizes the truth of what Lain is. She is a software-like god and not a human. And now that the barriers are nearly down between the two worlds, Lain is pretty much a god of our world too. Lain says that she can fix this. She says that she can now delete all the memories of the rumor that happened, which she did in Layer 8 already, but we're going to see it here again from Alice's perspective. However, this time, Lain also spares Alice and the rumors about her. The next morning, Alice goes to school and sees that teacher, when her friends seem to not remember anything about the rumor. Just then, Alice remembers what Lain said she'd do, and it clicks. She fully believes Lain, but is horrified of her, as a normal person would be, coming face to face with a software that is in the human body, who also happens to be the god of the internet, who also now happens to be the god of our world. What a mouthful. This episode ends when Alice stares at Lain, horrified.
Landscape. Layer 12.
Layer 12, Landscape. This episode starts with someone saying, I had no idea the world was this simple. I always thought that the world was such a big and scary place. But once you figure it out, it's all so easy. We are then shown Alice, sitting in class staring at Lain, who she knows is some sort of god now. When Lain notices her, she texts her, you should just rewrite bad memories. Alice just stares at her in disagreement. We then see Lain has fully embraced what she is, connecting with all people at the subconscious level, the god of the wired and the god of the unconscious. She is connected with everyone without the need of the internet or the wired or any device. The wall has nearly fallen. Aerie then gives a speech about that fact. All the functions of the human body, without exception, can be put into words and described in materialistic terms. The body is nothing but a machine. If the physical limitations of the body restrict the mankind's evolution, it would be as if the fall of the species called man has already been decided by a god that doesn't even exist. The information etched inside humans isn't only that which they themselves have acquired as individuals. This species called man is connected to his predecessors, and information has accumulated within him. If that information isn't shared, it's meaningless, mere data. Mankind can evolve by their own power, but to do that, they must first know what they truly are. Originally, people were connected to each other. All I've done is make things as they once were. That's what you have done, Lain, so you can do anything you want. He is proclaiming that the human body is a machine. We are all intrinsically connected to each other no matter what. All the information we know has come from someone else and then linked back to us. How to make fire, how to cook food, how to drive a car, everything. So there is no need for a body or to be unconnected from the wired, as we are all connected from the day that we are born. The wired is the collective unconsciousness, just like how the internet sort of is just that in the real world. There's no need for a human body, because we are all connected in one entity anyway. That is Aerie's philosophy, at least. We then see the men in black again, realizing that they have failed. The wall has fallen, and they are all connected. The question is, why though? They killed all the knights, right? Their plan, and by extension, Aerie's plan should have failed too. What happened? Their boss's car rolls up and gives them a bunch of money. He basically says that they were played. Their boss is not working for Tachibana Industries, but Aerie himself all along. They played right into his hand. He says to escape this plan, all they have to do is find a place on the planet with no wires and is not covered by a satellite, which is impossible. The boss then just drives away. Just then, in the recorder goggles, they are both killed by Lain, or at the very least, their bodies are destroyed. In Lain's mind, it doesn't matter anyway, just like Aerie said. We then go back to Alice. She walks to Lain's house only to find her room is literally growing wires out of it, like a cancer. She goes in and sees Lain's sister, who is effectively brain dead at this point, and the entire house is trashed. She freaks out and runs up to Lain's room, where she finds Lain just sitting in a pile of wires. Lain is there and welcomes Alice. Alice is horrified and asks Lain why she didn't steal Alice's memories and connect her to the wire like everybody else. She asks Lain if she hates her that much that she didn't erase her memories, and made her remember all the horrors that have gone down so far. Lain says it's quite the opposite, actually. It's because she loves Alice. Lain doesn't know why she didn't connect her, something just made her not do it. However, something very important happens in this moment. Alice, despite being horrified of Lain, accepts her. She loves Lain just the same, no matter what she is. Just then, Aerie calls out. Says that if Lain loves her, she should just force her to connect to the wired. Lain says no. Aerie, confused, then says that there's something wrong with Lain. The program, Lain. He'll fix it. Lain just has to take his hand. And then he manifests a hand in the real world. Alice, by the way, just sees Lain talking to herself at this point, and when asked who she's talking to, Lain just says, God, which is probably cause for alarm, but you know. Lain then says she doesn't understand Aerie. Why should she connect Alice to the wired? Why would it matter? Aerie says what he already basically said. Everyone's connected. All information comes from somewhere, so you are always connected to the human unconsciousness at all times anyway, if you have a body or not. Lain asks then, who told him that? The only thing Aerie did was continue other people's research. Aerie agrees. Lain then asks, who started the chain? Who was the first one to have created the information? Who gave Aerie the right to do what he is doing now? Who gave humans the ability to connect to each other? It had to have been another human, right? If all things stems from other humans. And most importantly, if Aerie is connected and his theory is true, there will be someone else who will come after Aerie. Someone more powerful than his so-called god. But it doesn't matter. With no body, Aerie can't grow to understand. A body is necessary to really connect to others. like Lain is with Alice. Real human contact. Eri, then spiraling after Lain pointed out a flaw in his logic, ironically tries to materialize his own body from nothing, making a mass of flesh and connecting to that, not only to grow, but to kill Lain for pointing this out. Lain, the true god of the Wired in technology, launches her computer parts at the flesh that is appearing.
アリス、あなたには肉体なんて無意味なんでしょ。
Killing it. Killing Eri, the false god of the Wired, once and for all. But more importantly, destroying her computer, symbolically disconnecting everybody from the Wired.
私またわかんなくなっちゃって。私がいるのこっちなのかそっち側なのか。私そっち側のどこにだっている。それは知ってるの。だって繋がってるんだもの。でしょ。でも私の本当の私のいるところってどこ。あ、本当の私なんていないんだっけ。私は私の存在を知っている人の中にだけいるけど、それだって今こうやって喋っている私は私だよね。この私って誰？
The episode starts exactly where the last one left off. Lain and Alice just defeating Eri. But not all is well. Alice, for lack of a better term, is broken. Psychologically. She screams and hits Lain, causing Lain to bleed for the first time. And I don't blame her. Imagine you just saw a false god materialize out of nothing, and then your best friend just used her superpowers to cause all the electronics in the room to crush him. I'd probably break too. Lain then laments that no matter what she does, no matter how much she tries to save Alice from her pain, it always ends up making it worse. Lain then reluctantly resets everything once again. Not just a few times like the last time, but everything. From the first episode, none of it happens. That includes Lain herself. We then see the family of Lain eating breakfast, with no Lain. Everyone is okay. The sister, or should I say, the only daughter, is not broken anymore. The father and the mother seem happy. When the father looks at the empty chair, puzzled. Why do they have 4 chairs here? We then see Alice heading into school, where the other girls of her group ask her to go to Siberia tonight. Alice says that sure, and that they should invite her. When asked who she means, Alice is perplexed of who she was thinking of. Maybe she was thinking of Chisa, the girl who committed suicide in the first episode, who is now alive and well. Alice confusedly says to forget about it, and then says, if you don't remember something, it never happened. She walks away. We then see several other characters who had encountered Lain going about their daily lives as if nothing happened. The men in black are now power line workers. Eri is walking to his job at Tachibana Labs upset, muttering to himself that today is the day he is finally going to quit. We then get text on screen saying that if no one remembers it, did it really happen? So why not erase all that happened? The rumor, the person, the idea that is Lain. So that's what she did.
Present day. Present time.
The second half of the final episode, we see Lain alone in a barren city, talking to presumably is herself, or a version of herself. Her ego, perhaps, hence the name of the episode. It asks why she just doesn't redo everything, or better yet, become the real god. Just watch everything. She doesn't have to do anything. Or maybe just let Eri do it all again. Wouldn't that be fun? Lain then screams at herself, denying this part of herself that wants to be human or god or to even exist. It disappears. Everything disappears. Right then, Lain breaks down and cries in the dark. No one to remember her. Until finally, a light. She looks up and sees a giant version of her father? Or maybe her fake father? You might wonder what this means, as I did. But there are two options here. In my mind, this is the real God. Not Lain of the Wired, not Eri, not the God of the Wired, but God. Using a familiar face to be calming to Lain. They talk to themselves, and he says that she doesn't need the bear onesie anymore. I didn't mention it, but the bear onesie that she always wears randomly is supposed to remind her of safety, and to make her feel safe. Lain and God then talk to each other, face to face. Not over the wired or anything, not through some consciousness, but face to face, body to body, God to God. Another interpretation of this scene I've heard is that this is the same father that spoke to Lain in her dreams in that one episode. It's not really her father or God, but herself, the decision maker, the archetype of Jungian psychology, the one that finalizes her decision of doing what she did. And in Jungian philosophy, this is just a way of saying she made her own decision and she's comfortable with it now. The final scene of the entire anime is Alice around 10 years later. She's walking with that teacher she liked, probably now married or dating or something. She's walking happily when she sees a little girl on a bridge near her. Thinking she recognizes her, Alice goes up to her. Alice knows her, but can't quite place how. Alice asks her name, Lain. Her husband walks up behind her and says hello to Lain, and Alice wonders if her and this strange girl will ever meet again. This girl she just met. And then...
Yeah, Lain.
そうだね。いつだって会えるよ。
That's it. That's the entirety of Lain. Well, the anime version of it at least. There is a manga and a video game about Lain, but we won't get into that because this video is probably already very long. But I want to go back to those questions I proposed to you to think about at the beginning of the video. Who or what is Lain? Who or what is Eri? What happened chronologically in this story? And what is the message you're supposed to get out of Serial Experiments Lain? Let's start with number one. What is Lain? We've sort of touched on this a bit during the summary, but let me expand on it. Lain's physical body is created by Eri through, I don't know, stem cells or something, and a rumor of the God in the Wired is written into a software and given to this body. However, if we go deeper, the rumor would not exist without the collective of humanity believing it. So in a deeper way, Lain is the collective unconsciousness, in a way. Everyone is Lain, and Lain is everybody. She has the power to control memories, and through this power, she can pretty much rewrite time, as whatever people believe happened, actually happened. Number two, who or what is Eri? This one is much easier. Eri was a software engineer at Tachibana Labs, and while developing the wire itself, or at the very least parts of the Wired, he wrote some sort of backup of his psyche into the Wired. He then commits suicide. However, this consciousness remained in the Wired as a sort of pseudo-god. His goal is to fully merge the Wired with that of the real world, so he can become a god in reality as well. He gets very close, but cannot finish the job without Lain fully returning to the Wired. Just as she's about to return, Alice reminds her of her humanity. Lain then questions Eri, and Eri is defeated by his own hubris, and also maybe a bit of Lain's technology powers. What happens chronologically in the story? Alright, here's the big one. This is going to be what we know for sure happens. There's a lot of ambiguity in the story, so stuff may sound weird or missing, but this is what I believe happened. For sure. Ready? Like we said, Eri was a software engineer in Tachibana Labs. He has the idea to upload himself to the Wired as a godlike being while designing it. Either before he does this or after he already discards his physical body, he encounters a rumor of a god in the Wired already, Lain. He then creates a fake body and implants the rumor into that body, effectively creating an artificial human with the powers of God. He then hires a mother, a father, a sister, and perhaps a few friends to pretend they are already related to Lain as family and friends. He then implants the memories of those people and they play along with her. Meanwhile, Tachibana Labs, privy to Ares' plan to become a real god by merging the two worlds, tries to stop him and his followers, the Knights of the Eastern Calculus, from achieving their goal. Someone high up in the company secretly agrees with Ares, however, and hires 2 men in black to spy on Lain and be on the side of Tachibana Labs and do whatever Lain says to protect her. The men in black don't realize they are getting played though, and working against what they are actually being told to do. That's when the series actually starts in episode 1. Shisa, a girl in Lain's class, commits suicide because of Ares somehow. He provoked her or something. Lain, who has now begun attending school, makes friends with Alice and her friend group. As this is happening, a Lain in the Wired that was either always there or created and manipulated by the Knights to stir things up begins doing just that. Stirs things up without Lain's knowledge. Things like merging games and getting people to kill each other on accident in those games, and strangely putting a giant Lain in the sky. Alice sees this and begins to question what Lain is. Lain, upset by these Knights, tracks them down and gives the list to the Wired, where the men in black, acting simultaneously on behalf of Lain and Aerie without knowing it, track them down and either kill them or get them all to commit suicide. Aerie then begins to work on sowing more discord between Lain and Alice, so Lain will kill herself and return to the Wired. A rumor gets spread that Alice is having sex with this teacher at their school, which may or may not be true, but either way, the rumor gets spread and people believe it, so it is true. Alice figures out that this is somehow Lain's doing. Whether she wants to or not, Lain spreads this rumor even more. Lain, now feeling she's hurt Alice, erases everyone's memories but Alice's. Alice, now extremely freaked out by what Lain is, goes to see her in her house one last time. Lain is covered by wires and is seemingly about to finalize the merge of the worlds. However, seeing that Alice came to see her, Lain hesitates, and Aerie, acting as God, tells her just to erase Alice's mind too and assimilate into the Wired. For some reason, there is some connection through physical bodies that Lain feels with Alice. Lain then points out a contradiction in Aerie's thinking that he is not God and someone had to start the information chain. If his next step in evolution is true, there will always be someone before and after him. Aerie, enraged, attempts to physically create another body through sheer willpower, I guess, and attach himself to it. Lain, with her technology powers, crushes the body with pieces of her computer. Alice, mentally destroyed by seeing all this, can no longer function physically. Lain, feeling the only way to fully fix this entire mess is to completely reset everything and erase herself. And she does just that. Erases herself from the memories of the collective unconscious, therefore making it so she never really existed. Lain then struggles being literally nothing. She thinks about doing it all over. But eventually, through the help of either the real God or searching deep within herself, she realizes she made the right decision. She then takes her place as either a piece of God or some sort of observer. So one last time, 10 years later, she puts herself back in the world just to talk to Alice. One last time. Alice has some sort of inkling that they know each other somehow, showing that despite her powers, their connection still exists somewhere deep down, because they met face to face. Lain then returns to nothingness or to God. And that's the entire summary. And for the final question, what is the message of Serial Experiments Lain? Well, that's widely debated, but I believe it's human connection. Not just through the internet, but like actually doing stuff with friends and making memories with them. However, I want to return to the title of the video again. No one understands Lain. In interviews, one of the creators, Chiaki Konaka, says there is a true meaning to all of this, but it's hidden in the work and no one will ever know it but him. You may ask, why make a piece of art and then not share the answer? Well, I think the HK Magazine interview with him says a lot about that. And it can be summarized with one quote that he says, "This story wasn't created for the present young persons, but for myself. I wasn't interested in today's young persons, and I wrote with no ideas about them. This is for him, not for us." However, in another interview he says, "I feel that the reaction of the people who liked Lain is different between Japanese and non-Japanese fans. They all found their own point of the theme in Lain, and that's what I wanted." So once again, the message here is to find your own message. There is no one answer, and whatever you got from the show is valid. He even says that some people agree with what Aries says in the show, and that's okay too. You have to find your own meaning, as I have found mine. Okay, one last thing. Let's be really serious here. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that there is some weird 9/11 connection to Lain. And I'm going to be very serious about this because I understand that 9/11 is one of, if not the biggest American tragedy that ever happened. So I'm going to treat this topic with some seriousness and respect as best as I can. So what does Lain have to do with 9/11? Well, during the airing of Lain for one of the first times in the United States, specifically episode 7, Society, was broadcast on the Sunday after 9/11. There is an archive of someone's VHS copy of this episode online with scrolling text at the top of the screen during the intro, saying, "Our hearts and our minds go out to the victims of the tragedy." Why do I bring this up though? Is it that important to bring up? Well, there is a point I want to make about the collective unconscious. Around this time, 9/11 was something very real and very serious, and it was on everybody's minds. I was only 2, so I obviously don't remember it, but it was a wake-up call to a lot of people of the last generation that real human lives were lost and it wasn't fiction. It was very serious. But people didn't talk about it. There was an eerie silence around that time, especially the first few days after it happened. In a way, the world was more connected than ever. Millions of Americans were all connected through the horrible tragedy of 9/11, and everyone knew what everyone was thinking. It's a pretty sad and somber coincidence that Lain aired around this time, when in a way America and even the world needed its message more than ever. That we are all together, and the more we stick together, the more we can get through. And we need to find comfort in each other in these trying times. There's a great video that goes more into depth on this topic by Screen Takes on YouTube. And that is actually what inspired this part of the video, and I highly recommend it because he puts it into words better than I ever could. With all of that, however, we are done with Serial Experiments Lain. It has become one of my favorite anime series ever. Probably not top 3, but up there for sure. And I hope that you thoroughly enjoyed it as I have. I hope to hear your message that you got from it in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.